Are you parenting from a solid understanding of childhood development? Understanding Maria Montessori's four planes of childhood development has been perhaps the most helpful thing that I have ever studied as a parent. And my husband, Christopher Jolma, my business partner in crime and best friend, has asked me to come live today and tell you about a conversation that I had with my children recently. It was just a natural conversation that we had that just flowed out of the way I naturally parent. And he heard about it and he said, "Hon, you have to tell all these other parents about this because this is so helpful." So here it goes. I came out of the shower one morning after my morning routine, and my children had agreed that if I had let them make pancakes, that they would clean it all up while I was doing my morning routine. So when I was done, I came out and I found they had just fallen to pieces. They were squabbling, there were tears, and the pancakes were not cleaned up. So I called them all up and we gathered them together and I got the story of what happened and I heard the this isn't fair and that wasn't right and he did this and they did that and she wasn't working the way she was supposed to be working, and we've all heard it. That's the way they cooperate. And I said, "Listen, I took hours out of the morning to help you make these pancakes. It's summer and I didn't make you get dressed and start your morning routine and do everything that you were supposed to do. All I asked from you is just clean the kitchen and then you're free to play for the afternoon." But you couldn't even do that. And of course the tears started to flow from the children and I heard, "I'm so sorry." And I thought that it was a good time to explain to them the four planes of development. Yes, I tell them about how they are developing because it helps them understand what is going on. So I said to them, "Have you ever seen a baby at church or one of your cousins, and you see that little baby? He's born and he can't hold up his head and he can't roll over, and after just a little while he develops, he rolls over, he sits up, he pulls up, and he starts babbling, and within just a year or two he's talking and walking and moving." But the funny thing is, this didn't happen to just this baby. This happens to all babies on relatively the same time frame. And my children said, yeah, they noticed that. First they hold their head up and then they roll over and then they sit up and then they start pulling themselves up and they take their first steps and they begin to babble in the same way. I said, "Did you know that that is a natural progression of development? That God designed all babies to develop in the same way." Now, that development doesn't end when the baby learns to walk and talk. That development that God designed on that time frame continues throughout your entire childhood. And you are in a certain plane of development that is the reason why you are having these squabbles and learning how to cooperate with each other and why it's hard. And they looked at me kind of confused. I said, "Let me explain to you some more. Have you ever heard a baby in church? He hears all the people singing and he wants to participate. And so he starts shouting, 'Ah! Ah! Ah!' And the mother gets nervous and says, 'Shh, be quiet, you're bothering people.' But the baby's not doing anything wrong. The baby is learning how to communicate and how to talk like adults. He's striving to be an adult, and that's a good thing. But the bad thing is that he's very, very bad at communicating and talking. He's just learning how. Also, the baby is learning how to move and how to control his body. That's when he's pulling up, as he's standing up and sitting down and standing up and sitting down and wiggling and doesn't want to be held and wants to crawl away. And that's, again, a good thing. He's learning how to move. But it's the parent's job, and often the parent's frustration, that the parent has to guide that child in learning how to control his body, how to sit still at the dinner table, how to sit still in church, how to control his movement for stillness as well as for motion. And it takes this patience as the parent is teaching them. You can exercise your voice, but you can't be loud in church. And that applies as well to the older children in this way. A child from ages 0 to 3 needs to learn movement and language. And he has an intense need for external order. And a child between the ages of 3 to 6 is practicing and perfecting that external order and language and movement. But then something miraculous happens when he reaches about the age of 6. His brain transitions, and he has this deep need for internal order, because the way God has designed him now is to learn the rules of society. The rules, what he ought to do and ought not to do, what others ought to do and ought not to do. And that's why the refrain of the 6-year-old is, "That's not fair." That's not fair is what the 6-year-old and the 7-year-old, the 8-year-old, 9-year-old is saying all the time. They're learning and practicing the rules of society. But the problem is, just like the 2-year-old is very bad at talking and will shriek and shout during church, so also the 7 and 8-year-old is very bad at the rules of society. And they're going to create squabbles and arguments, and there's going to be contention with his brothers and peers, because they're practicing and learning what others and themselves should and shouldn't do. And it creates a conflict. But that conflict is not necessarily naughty. It's not behavior that needs to be disciplined necessarily, but it is just like the 2-year-old needs to be taught how to sit still and how to be quiet and how to control their body as they're practicing language and motion. Also, that child in the second plane of development needs to practice and be taught by the parents the rules of society. And so when they're pointing at their sibling and saying, "That's not fair, he hit me," and I come along and I say, nobody walks up to you and for no reason, usually, hits somebody. What did you do to make them want to hit you? Now I can go deal with the child who was striking the other, and I will. But there is a moment here, a teachable moment, to teach the child in front of me who's tattletaling. I'm not going to correct the tattletaling necessarily. First, I'm going to use it as a teachable moment to help them understand the rules of society. What did you do that made them want to hit you? And I know that this conflict, this internal family squabbling, isn't going to end until they master the rules of society. And if you're tracking along the planes of development, you know that that is not going to settle down until about the age 12. You know, if you're following the patterns of development, the planes of development, you have age 0 to 3, they're learning a skill. And then from 3 to 6, they're practicing that skill. And in the first plane, it's language and movement. And then in the second plane, you have, again, the first period between 6 and 9. They're learning the rules of society, and this can be a very intense time for squabblings. But then from 9 to 12, a calmer stage of practicing those rules. And then we move into the third plane, and you get it all topsy-turvy in a altogether different plane there. We all know about the adolescence. So this knowledge helps me. It helps me to, first of all, understand the work that's at hand. Roll up my sleeves. When there's internal squabbling, I don't go, oh, what's wrong with my parenting? Why do my children hate each other? Why are they fighting with each other? It helps me to understand, no, this is the job that's in front of me for these next 6 years. And then we move on to the next phase where I tell them, I bring them in to this knowledge of this plane of development that they are in, and I help them to understand. So when I had this conversation with my children the other morning, after they had had such a horrible moment of sibling squabbling, I said, do you realize that all 4 of you are in this second plane of development? It's intense. It's intense. The bickering that can go on, the tattletaling. If I'm not there to really guide them through this, they can come to believe that something's wrong with them. They can come to believe that their siblings hate them. They can come to believe that they hate their siblings. But if they understand that there is a job that they're all working on, and they're working on it together, where they're trying to navigate the rules of society, and who enforces those rules and who doesn't enforce those rules, and what is right and what is wrong, and all of these boundaries, if they don't understand that this is their job in self-construction, then they can become very frustrated. So I bring them in on this little secret about childhood development. I say, this is what you need to know that you. And as I explained this to them, they got it. It was like this weight lifted off their shoulders, because not only did they understand themselves and their siblings, but they also understood that I understood them, and that I was on their side in this work of self-construction. And I explained to them that I'm not angry at them, and I don't have to forgive them, because this is just a task that we're working through, and it's hard. But we're all working on it together. All right, so that is what we did that's the story of the other morning when we had this family conflict that we had to work through and how we went about it. If you want to learn more about Maria Montessori's and the 4 planes of development, there's a wonderful book, a resource, and I'll include a link to it on this afterwards. It was recently translated from Italian, because Maria Montessori was Italian and she spoke Italian, and so all of her work needs to be translated. And this one was recently translated. It's called Montessori Speaks with Parents, and it goes over these planes of development. And also, we did a wonderful interview with a Montessori teacher, Maggie Radzik. She's been in the field for many, many years, and she just gave a beautiful explanation of the planes of development and how it relates to the homeschool. And I'll also include a link there to where you can see that. And it's about an hour-long video and goes into great detail in all of the planes and how it relates to education and homeschooling and everything else. So I hope that was helpful. Chris thought that it would be very helpful to share that. So there you have it.